Chuck Levin's. Wow.
Yeah.
What a history you guys have had with Taylor guitars.
No kidding. Let's
Who am I
start there.
talking to?
You got Adam Levin. And
Oh, Adam.
Alan's nephew.
Adam. Yeah.
And Paul Shine.
Paul. Man. I wouldn't have recognized you on the street, and you wouldn't have recognized me either, Paul.
That's right.
But this
Now we see
history
each
goes way
other
back.
again. Man, how long has it been?
Well, for me here, almost 44 years, and with you guys, about 40 or so.
Wow.
Seems like
Kurt would always come back from his sales trips talking about you guys. What a great store you were, and what great support you were.
Well, it was, this is one of those things, like a lot of things. We're happy to follow trends. If something is started somewhere else, we're happy to pile on if it means selling product, because that's the business we're in. Similar to people copying a patent that's expired, if it'll sell product, I mean, that's allowed. And sometimes we actually start trends. If you see something at the trade show and you know it's got legs, you say, yep, I want to do this. It's going to be a hit. And this was something where I got a phone call from a guy in Florida, and he wanted a Taylor 815 and a Taylor 855. I politely said, without seeming too ignorant, what's a Taylor 815 and a Taylor 855? He said, oh, yeah, they're a little outfit out of Lemon Grove, California, which I assume used to have lemon groves. Maybe it still does. And then, sure enough, a few days later, Alan, his uncle, got a call from a good friend of his, Dr. Dave Linehan, who sadly is no longer with us. And he wanted a Taylor, and I think it was an 810. I'm not sure of that one. I can't remember that, but it wasn't my sale. And so all of a sudden, Taylor was on my radar. So I made the call, and I believe I talked to Kurt at the time. I guess that's who was answering the phone back then. And of course, he had to do a Dun and Bradstreet, make sure our checks were good. They were, still are.
That's Kurt.
Always were, always will be. And so he decided if we'd buy 3 of them, which we pretty much had pre-sold, it was a no-brainer, that we could be a dealer. And so we said, yep, let's do it. And we didn't think he was going to drive across country in his Volvo Turbo to deliver them out of the trunk. I remember he got pulled over in Montana with no speed limit, doing about 125 or 130. And
baby.
He paid a $5 ticket on the spot for excessive expansion of natural resources. Basically, he was burning too much fuel.
That was their ticket.
And it was $5. You paid the cop, and then you were free to go 110, like take it down a little bit.
That was an environmental crime.
Yeah, exactly. They were way ahead of the curve on that environmental crime thing. California could have learned from them. Anyway, but so that's it. He delivered them to us, and that was the start of a long, healthy relationship. And a lot of guitars.
A lot of guitars. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, man, it's great to see you again, Paul.
Yeah.
And here's the 850.
There it is.
There it is.
There it is.
Boy, that brings back some memories, doesn't it?
It sure does. It's nice to see it again.
Wow. And we've got the 815, the 810. This 810 is exactly how my 810 is, which was the first Taylor guitar. After the American Dream, I decided to make a guitar that looked like this. I made it for myself. I still have it. I'd say it's 49 and a half years old. And it became...
you could probably get good money on eBay for that.
I probably could. I'd have to, we'll start with a low bid, but we'll work up.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about it. Like, what went into making that first guitar? How did this come to be? How did that guitar come to be? And then we can talk about the rest of the collection. But let's start with yours. Like, how did that happen?
Well, by then, I had learned what Martin Guitars was. I really didn't know anything about. When I made my first guitars, I'd never heard of Martin, Gibson, Fender. I didn't know anything about guitars. I had a Japanese guitar made by Coronet, the Japanese outfit that makes the band instruments, and that's what I had. And my friend had a Yamaha something. I don't know what model it was. It was a guitar, You know, it cost $65. It was a guitar. That's all I knew about guitars. And I wanted to make one. And so I did. Made 3 guitars in high school wood shop, made a banjo, found this little shop called the American Dream, started working at it, which was a very loose description of being employed, right? Because you went in and you hung out in this hippie shop, and then Sam, the owner, says, "Oh, Bob, go have that bench over there. And if a customer comes in and wants a guitar and you're not busy, you can make that guitar. And there's a base model price of, $275. You get half, I get half. And if he upgrades to a abalone rosette or a ab top, you get all the money for that." So that's how that little business worked. And it was just a hippie shop. And Kurt ended up getting a job there too with a friend, and he was refinishing electric guitars and whatnot. That's how Kurt and I got together. But those guitars were Sam's guitars. This Mustache Bridge is a refined version of what Sam was doing on a guitar. And I mean, I'm 18 years old, just out of high school, and Sam couldn't have been more than 25, And when he sold that, I'd made these American Dream guitars, but this one, by then, I had discovered Martin, and I bought a Martin D18 from a dealer in San Diego, a family-owned business called Thurl's Music. And I went down there one day, and they had this glass case, and there were 4 Martins in it. One of them was a D18. It was $450. I sold one of my 2 motorcycles, and I bought that guitar. And then I got it home. The sound, the playability, it didn't mean anything to me. I was too young, but I looked inside and I looked at the binding, and I'd made 3 guitars by then and struggled through it. And I thought, wow, this thing is made nicely. Look at inside this. My goodness gracious, how did they do that? Then I'd look at the binding. Whoa, look at this binding. There's no gaps. And, where it hits the spruce, it's razor sharp. I want to make a guitar like that. I want to make a guitar that looks nice like that. So when about the time that we started Taylor, I think it was probably before that actually, I decided I wanted to make a guitar, rosewood guitar with white binding, because I'd look at the Johnny Cash show on TV, and he had this black guitar with white binding. It was a D35. I had no idea it was a D35. I didn't know what a D35 was, but I looked at that guitar on a television screen and thought, wow, that guitar's nice. The shape is nice. I didn't know it was a dreadnought. I didn't know what a dreadnought was. But man, it just looks like it's well made. Man, it's got this white stripe all the way around the fingerboard. I want a guitar like that. And so that's how that first 810 came around. But I had been around enough that I heard about this thing called scallop bracing. So I scalloped the bracing on that. Completely different than the way Martin does it, because, well, I didn't know any better. And so I started my scallop at one end of a fan brace, not in the middle of a fan brace with a slope going on both sides. And that was the guitar. I put the diamond inlays on it, the white binding, and I took that every night I went home. I had a couple of roommates in a house, and I'd put the part that I'd made for that guitar that day in my car, and I'd take it to the house, and I would hold it, look at it, go to bed with it, get up the next day, look at it, put it in the car, take it back, sand it, bring the neck home, sand it. Finally, I got that guitar together. I'd met John Larrivee sometime by then. Yeah, actually, when you think about that, I don't think it was 74, 75. It must have been 75, 76. Anyway, sometime I had met John, and I asked him for some spruce. He sent me down a piece of European spruce. Here you go. And I opened up this little mail, and there was this piece of European spruce, and I put it together. And when the guitar was all done, I looked at the grain for it to be symmetrical, and I realized I'd glued it up this way. And I'm like, oh, well. And when I sprayed the back of that guitar, some blotches appeared. And I thought, oh, well, move on, So guys look at that guitar today. What's with the blotches on the back? I go, They appeared the first day I sprayed it. Move on.
That's the real
You
deal.
know?
That's how you know.
Yeah.
It's a feature, not a flaw.
You know, there's holes in it from when we had Bartolini preamps. That guitar had a Barkasberry pickup. It had a early Lloyd Baggs with a graphite at the top pickup. Then the early Lloyd Baggs with the micarta on the top. But we had tall saddles in those days, and they would snap off. The whole pickup would snap off. I talked to Lloyd. We got to figure something out. But I was addicted to his 1/8-inch wide saddle. And by then, Larry Fishman was making the Martin Thin Line. That was his product. That was his one and only product. And that was a 3/32 saddle, right? And I just couldn't go back to a 3/32 saddle because I had this compensation angles that I'd worked out, and our guitars had good intonation. I really think that in the early days, I lived the life of better to be lucky than smart, because I designed a guitar that had a tone that was different and a neck that was different, and people dug it. And then I, backfilled. Well, I meant to do that, and but it gave a lot of guys who were recording or not playing bluegrass a more clear sound. Electric guitar players started migrating into acoustic guitar because of that. So this guitar's had all these pickups in it and holes left over from different pickups. And so it's a nice eBay item now. It really is.
Well, and getting into like the legacy collection, this is kind of like greatest hits of your whole history. It started with this 810 that was yours, and now it encompasses all the ingenuity that you've put into the guitar making over the last 50 years. So like, can you tell us a little bit about like how the collection came to be and kind of what it means to you that you have these guitars that obviously meant so much? I mean, this was,
well, they were designed
from the earth, like from your hands, this thing was crafted, and now, 50 years later, you're able to put in these appointments that have come into the company over the last 50 years to make this thing, this commemorative and historic piece.
Well, certainly our manufacturing has gotten better. If you look at this guitar, this 810, the bridge is different than my 810 because we didn't design this until the early 80s, right? So my guitar's got a kind of a Martin style bridge. The inlays are the same, binding's the same, rosette's the same. The peg head shape is straight, not curved like our current guitar. Of course, it's got the Taylor neck, but my guitar has got a bolt-on neck. It's just a flush-mounted bolt-on. This is the improved version of the bolt-on neck. It's basically the same bracing. And so I would say that the 3800 series legacy, the 810, the 815, the 855, and, it's just great to have you on, Paul, and tell that story that you just told at the beginning of your introduction with a customer calling and asking for an 815,
Right,
and
two. He bought both, an 815 and an 855. He wanted them both.
And the other guy bought the 810.
Right.
Wow, that's amazing. And so that guitar is worthy to be made. That's the first 20 years. The next 20 years is when we designed our first grand auditorium, right? And we made the 514 CE. And that was when our shape, our trade dress, the shape of the guitar was really what I would say the first original Taylor, because those early guitars were the kind of the shapes that were left over from the American Dream. And after we did this, I went back and redrew our Dreadnought, redrew the Jumbo. I did that with the help of Larry Breedlove. He was my guitar building sidekick. We did everything together during those years. And so him and I would work on things together, but then I would go have to solve a production problem or own the company, so to speak. And Larry would be sitting there doing the drawing of a shape. But that Grand Auditorium, these are the two guitars that built our company, the 800 series and the Grand Auditorium. When we finally got to the 814 CE, we could say that, the 814 CE is the guitar that built the next 20, 30 years of Taylor guitars. Chris Martin, a dear friend of mine, we're great friends. he says, you know, the Martin Dreadnought is the most copied guitar, you know, in the world, you know, certainly the most copied shape. And I think that the Taylor 14 CE is the second most copied shape. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and to sell those back in the day, it was simply a matter of comfort, because we would explain to people, because we try to be as nerdy as possible and get to the heart of the matter. It's not just you're going to like this, it's pretty here, you can afford it. This is about, people sit down to play guitars on a couch typically, and they typically cross their right leg over their left leg. So all of a sudden a Dreadnought turns into a J200. So, you know, just everybody's got the problem with the rotator cuff eventually. They'll find out later why. So it was easy to sell this based on the premise that the little bit of low mid you give up because of the body shape difference between that and a Dreadnought is more than compensated by the fact that you can stand to play it for more than 30 minutes at a time. And hopefully, if a guitar is that good, you're going to want to play it for more than 30 minutes at a time. So this is an idea that worked. And I remember, I hope it's not a bad thing to mention TJ Baden, who I used to do
No, I love TJ.
Yeah, I used to do a lot of buying from him when he was in there. And I remember him explaining that at that point, or shortly thereafter, the introduction to the 14 CE, that comprised 80% of your total sales with things that ended in 14 CE. And I wasn't going to argue with it. I just went full ham, and we used to sell those every day. Something that ended in, and we still do, that ends in 14 CE. So anyway,
and our current Andy Powers designed 814 CE Builder's Edition. That's a nice guitar. People love that guitar.
Yeah,
really
that's
is.
A very very sexy guitar.
When you were coming up
guitars,
with go ahead. No, it's all you.
Well, I was just going to say, these guitars bring back, grandma's spaghetti sort of thing. There's and younger players that weren't around then that missed out on these are going to have a chance to pick these up and strum them and see what they think. People around here are playing them. They're like, wow, I remember that. I love that.
Well, we tell people that these are design. When they ask about these designs, they say, look, this is a design strong enough to launch a company that's still, strong 50 years later.
Yeah, Adam, you might dig this story. When we first came out with the 514 CE, the first year was the 20th anniversary, and it wasn't a CE. We had a mahogany cedar and a rosewood spruce guitar that we made 500 of them that year, 250 of each. The next year we had the CE version, and it was a year later than that. I tell this story all the time because it's just kind of a cute story. I was at Nashville NAMM. It's a small NAMM show, and we had a booth, maybe like a 4x4 island. You know how those were, Paul? And we had stools, and I was just standing around the booth, and this guy was sitting there on a stool playing 514 CE, just strumming chords, playing rhythm. And I walked by, and he goes, "Hey, you're Bob Taylor. Y'all Bob Taylor, aren't you?" And I go, "Yeah, that's me." He goes, "I love this 514 CE." He goes, "Want me to tell you why?" I go, "Yeah, I'd love to know why." He goes, "Well, I'm a studio cat in Nashville, and I do this." He's strumming while he's talking. "I do this 8 hours a day." He goes, "And this is the best guitar I ever had to do this 8 hours a day," And, he goes, "I get work done, and they call me back."
Yeah. Go. A 9-foot piano doesn't do you any good if it won't fit in the living room.
Yeah. and a guitar that's too boomy slows things down in a studio. We all know that.
Yeah.
Well, about that design, in guitar world, and especially acoustic guitar world, like trying to draw outside the lines or do something different than what was is a dangerous game. Like people are very attached to the history. Obviously you were too. That's where you came from, right? The Dreadnought, and you had heard about Martin and some of those things. So like, what drove you to come up with this new shape, and kind of what was the process of drawing it out, and how did you land it? This is it. Like we did it. How did you come up with that?
Well, Paul, maybe you would be able to say whether you are of the opinion or not, but we continued to get comments from dealers saying, we could it could be cool if you had a guitar that was essentially as big as a dreadnought. You know, the lower bout. It had some volume, but it was more curved and maybe had a little bit more delicate flavor to the tone because fingerstyle is really starting to come on. Remember, Paul, we'd introduced the grand concert with Chris Proctor.
Oh yeah, I remember
the 1
Nancy
7/8
Griffiths
neck
and Chris Proctor and all that. As a matter of fact, if I can say this little anecdote, I've only made a couple of buying errors that I can think of in my career here. And one was, I think it was Acoustic Guitar Magazine wrote an incredibly glowing review of 612C when you just introduced it. And I went a little too deep on the buying of 612Cs. And that's when Adam's father gave me my first colonoscopy. I remember that.
Well, a guy can handle a couple of them. You're supposed to get one every 10 years now, you know. So at any rate, to respond to that, we just started thinking about it. And then the artist, Kathy Mattea, was talking about getting a new guitar. And it was TJ said to her, well, Bob's been thinking about this new guitar and him and Larry have been drawing. Maybe we can make you a guitar that their idea is and see what you think of it. And so we did. We made a guitar and, she loved it. You know, it was a real nice guitar. Then we made her another one that was a cutaway. And when we did the cutaways, it was painted black. She used it in all of her stuff that she did. She named it Blackie, and she lost it in the Nashville flood. And that guitar was not only truly dead, it was most sincerely dead. You know, we couldn't bring it back all the way. But that's how we got there, Adam. We just we took that concept that some dealers were talking about, and give credit where it's due. They said, just conceptually, a guitar like this could play well. And by then, pickups were becoming more of a thing. You know, they weren't a thing when we first started. I remember Frets magazine. Remember that magazine?
Oh, yeah.
You know, Frets magazine did an article about us once, and the opening sentence was, Taylor Guitars, a reluctant supplier to the acoustic electric guitar market, because putting the pickups in guitars was such a pain.
Well, I
barely worked.
I do want to weigh in here, because I know that people get sick of me taking credit for things I actually did. They do around here anyway. But that was largely a result of a conversation between myself and TJ, because we were busy after hammering on the Takamine rep, because our arch rival across town, Koob Veneman, had Takamine, and we didn't. And I was getting calls about them, because that's what happens when you're in a town where one dealer has it and you don't. And they'd rather buy from me anyway, right? So I finally was able to get Takamine, and we're busy selling a couple of their key models, which were cutaway rosewood dreadnoughts. I won't mention them, but I think you know the two I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And they had a great preamp in them. And I told TJ, you know, you really ought to put a pickup in a 310 with a cutaway, because I know I could sell a solid wood American guitar. And that's kind of how the 310 CE came about. There, I said it. You know, I've wrecked better lives.
I believe every word of that. We continued to dive in more and more into that and just working. You know, I told you a lot about our, you know, the trajectory with Bags and Fishman, and of course Takamine made their own pickups, and they had Ovation behind them, and that was really great. And by the way, I'm on this whole second generation of Takamine president and product managers. Those people have been some of my dearest friends ever. And at this last trade show, you guys know that we have a ebony sawmill, right?
Right.
And we have a partner in Spain called Medinter, who's now owned by Stu Mack. And we cut ebony sets, and they sell those sets. And I was looking... right across the booth from us was Takamine. I went over, talked to my friends because they had just visited, and they had a glass case out in front with the most beautiful Takamine dreadnought, decorated D45 style, beautiful vine inlay on it, and ebony back and sides that came from our mill. And that Tom Waters is the rep. He used to be a Taylor rep. And I go, Tom, has this guitar been sold? He said, let me check. Maybe if it has, maybe I'll unsell it, And I go, I want to buy it. I want to buy that guitar if it's not sold. It's a beautiful guitar. And it was a real guitar. You could tell that they're the luthier of luthiers in that factory. I just was in their factory 2019, haven't been back since COVID started and haven't been to Japan since then. But yeah, I've always loved Takamine as a company, just loved them. I actually love every guitar maker. If you're a guitar maker, I like you.
As you're saying this, it's making me think like you are a unique builder and a businessman in the world of all of this, where like you've done so many good things for the industry in the sustainable way that you build the guitars and the way that you've done a lot of this. I mean, so many, it's almost like you have so many different businesses that you've done to create these instruments here, whether it's mills and forests and just the way that you've kind of interacted with the larger ecosystem of making guitars, and just talking, that you are so free and open talking about other brands just shows how remarkable these guitars are. You know what you have, you respect what everyone else has, and there's a place for all of it, which is special and cool. You don't hear that from everybody that has such respect for the art, for the industry, for all of it. And I think that's why, you're still at the top of the game today.
Well, thank you. I just appreciate it. I always say nobody understands a guitar builder like another guitar builder. So my best friends are guitar builders. Bill Collings was one of my greatest friends. I spoke at his memorial service. I was in a dealer in Colorado recently, and I said, show me one of the custom Martins that you have in, like one you like. He go, I'll just open any one. He pulled out a case, opened it up, and I played this guitar, and I'm like, dang, that's a nice guitar. I got to tell you, that's a nice guitar. People are making nice guitars. And I've also befriended, I cruise YouTube and look at guys' channels that make guitars. And then I contact them. And it's like, hey, let's be friends. Maybe I can help you in some sort of way. I know the way around the block after 50 years. And I love to hang with younger people making guitars. I went to the Fretboard Summit in Chicago a couple of weeks ago. I just hung out with guitar makers, for 3 days. I leave next week to the summit in Mannheim, Germany. There's 800 booths in that show, and it's all guitars and basses, And I'm just going to geek out with guitar builders. I've sort of reached grandpa status, and so.
But it's a badge of honor. You've earned it at this point because
it's just fun. Yeah, I just love it.
And you guys are still pushing the
envelope.
envelope.
I can help somebody, I want to help it. And everybody that's out there making guitars, every single person is trying to solve a problem, and they're pouring their heart and soul into making this thing better or that thing better. It might be their own craftsmanship. It might be artistic value. It might be a real problem with guitars. And there's nothing that I get more fuzzy, warm, genuine feeling than seeing what other people are doing and just admiring what they're doing.
Can I flip that around and ask you the question? What problem are you trying to solve now? I mean, you've crafted amazing instruments, and you've always been on like kind of the cutting edge of evolving these instruments. What's the next problem you're trying to solve? What's the next frontier?
Well, you guys know how the necks go on our guitars. They were called the NT neck at first by accident. Now we call them the Taylor neck, but all of us old timers still call them NT neck, And you could take that neck off the guitar, put a couple shims in it, put it back on. You've changed the neck angle. And I've always felt from the very, very beginning that a guitar has got to be able to be easily repaired. And the neck angle is the repair or the adjustment that almost every guitar is going to need in its life. So why should it be hard? Especially on a less expensive guitar when that job could cost more than the guitar's even worth, right? And so I always wondered what would be the next version of that. And I can't tell you how it works, but you're going to see it before long. But Andy has figured out the next version of our neck. that's more easily adjustable. It could be user adjustable. You can do it. You'll be able to do it with the strings on while you're doing a podcast, just reach in and turn a screw and change it. And so I'm always, always, always looking at playability and neck angles and straightness of neck as one of the most important things on a guitar. The second thing is, where does wood come from, and how do we make really compelling guitars as we use less of the unobtainium woods, And this is why I love the 314 CE Builder's Edition, which is made out of urban ash or chamois ash. That's LA street trees, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
And us tapping into some of those things is great. Regrowing wood that we can use. Our koa plantations that we're reforesting 560 acres that we own in Hawaii with improved koa species, wilt resistant, won't die with the virus that's killing koas there. And 35 years from now, probably 25 years from now, some of them will find their way into our guitars. 35 years from now, we'll have a sustainable supply that could serve more than Taylor guitars. The ebony we've been planting, we're 45,000 ebony trees into the plantings. We don't own any of them. The villages that put them in own them all. But those are going to grow. We'll continue that project. Urban, that is just absolutely paramount to me, because some people go, well, why wouldn't you use graphite? I go, well, that's like tofurkey to me. I'd rather use wood. I really would rather just use wood. And there's so many kinds of wood that make wonderful guitars, but you just have to package it to where it's compelling to people,
Yeah. I mean, I think that passion makes selling these special, like just the whole line. I mean, knowing that that's what goes into making these instruments, that always looking for the next wood, or not just looking for it, but a way to make it sustainable for both the people that live locally around it and for anyone else that might need to use it. Like, that's a remarkable thing that you don't hear that often. And you've done a phenomenal job being a steward of kind of just acoustic guitars in general, just the industry. It's impressive, and it makes these even more special that it's been around 50 years and we're here to celebrate it.
Thank you, Adam. That means a lot to me, and you're age appropriate to feel that way. I mean, you really are, because we're trying. What I'm trying to do is leave you with more choices than I had. Right? That's really what I'm trying to do, and the thing is we can't just keep hammering the same thing over and over, because that's what it used to be. So it takes somebody to branch out. I know wood suppliers that say, I have a new wood, Bob. Nobody will use it until you do. You have to introduce it, because the industry will not use it until you do, right? Our 25th anniversary Sapelli guitar was the first Sapelli on the market, and then Ovencall we introduced, and those became staples across a lot of people's guitar lines. So if you take a leadership position in something like that, you also have to bear the responsibility and the risk of introducing things, pouring the marketing money into it, making sure the guitar's right, and then other people can follow. And since I care about the guitar industry as much as I care about Taylor guitars, we find it a pleasure to do that. Sometimes it costs us money, but there's nickels left over for us, and we're not suffering.
We appreciate it, and we are honored and appreciate just being able to represent and work with you in putting guitars in people's hands.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I'm so thrilled and pleased to be with you, Adam. I mean, Levin, still there. That store is a fixture. It's an icon. And Paul, 44 years. And you were super...
I'm a slow learner. What can I say?
You know what I always appreciated about you, and it's, Kurt and TJ would tell me the stories. They were like, Paul Shine thinks this. Paul Shine thinks that. Paul Shine wants this. Paul Shine wants that. And I'll tell you what, you're right way more often than
Yeah.
you're wrong.
That's the problem when you're right a lot, is you think you're always right. So I got to watch that. We all do.
Well, I love that you've dedicated your life to selling guitars, you know. And by the way, talking about friends, and can I mention or not, like you said about TJ, Brian Meter was out here 2 weeks ago.
Oh,
and I got to see him again.
Yeah.
And what a pleasure that was.
Still part of the family.
I hired him. See, I was right again.
Yeah. So, we just go way back when we think about early dealers that have been with us. You guys pioneered our guitars. You showed those guitars that I'll say nobody wanted, but somebody did want them. They called you and said, "Get me that guitar."
Exactly.
So both things are true at the same time.
Right. I could have discovered you at the NAMM show, but honestly, it's easier when the demand is already defined and in front of you. It's one of those things where you have to look at it and say, well, if these people are asking for something they've never touched, then somebody must have played it in concert. Someone must have talked about it in a magazine. Something's going on, so I need to investigate this. That's happened with certain brands of basses. There's other times where I would be at the show and see your Taylor guitars at the show. But this happened before I was going to the NAMM show, because I think I went to my first NAMM show in '83. And I was pretty honored that the Levin sent me to the NAMM show, because that wasn't something you usually got to do if you weren't named Levin. And they believed in me, I guess, my powers of Nostradamus to predict the future. And but this was a case where the customer asking about it, or customers asking for it, meant that I needed to investigate and see what this was. And with a 3-guitar commitment, I said, well, let's take a shot, because obviously somebody cares. And then it was off to the races after that. And I have to tell you that during the 80s, and you probably know this already, in the 80s and the 90s, the growth was exponential. And I don't use that term lightly. I mean, it literally was doubling and tripling in a month-by-month basis. It went completely bonkers, and hence the 612C incident that I mentioned earlier. So it was there was a lot of things going on. There was one day, I will say this, where we delivered 15 Taylor guitars on a Saturday. On one Saturday. Goodness. 15 out the door. That's even by our standards.
You know, virtual high five on that.
Back before the internet, 15 in a day, that's nutty. You know, so yeah.
That is nutty. Well, you guys are nutty. And I have to say, we got here to talk about our legacy series, but your legacy is every bit as important. We wouldn't have the legacy without your legacy. It's a thrill for me to be here with you guys. So get out of here, you knuckleheads. We got
guitars to sell. He's got to get back to work.
We got to bring this to an end. I love you guys.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the time.
Too,
thanks for doing what you do.
Bye-bye.
Bye.